Airlines Confidential with Scott McCartney is made possible with support from Pratt & Whitney, committed to working smarter, cleaner, and greener today for a more sustainable tomorrow. PrattWhitney.com. Infinity Flight, the leader in Cadet Academy flight training programs. InfinityFlight.com. Ontario International Airport in Southern California. SoCal So Easy. And by Cirium, the world's most trusted source of aviation analytics, Cirium.com. We also welcome your business's support. Contact us at airlinesconfidential.com.
Welcome to Airlines Confidential. I'm Scott McCartney, wishing all who celebrate Rosh Hashanah a Happy New Year. It may be the start of a new year on the Jewish calendar, but it certainly is a year with many of the same old issues on the airline calendar. We will get to all that and more. We'll talk about the disconnect between math and economics, the connection between aviation and baseball, and the link between major Spirit Airlines shrinking and airline earnings. So with all that, Shana Tova, Dave Hilfman, welcome back.
Thank you, Scott. Shana Tova to you as well. Happy New Year. Thrilled to be back and co-hosting with you, my friend. I've just got back from a rough week in Spain. I had to do a little, I'll call it business and a little golf together with our good friends over at North Star Travel Media. They've got some guys that been doing this trip for a while. So, I had a great time with them. Of course, they're all thinking through the issues relative to their recent acquisition by Japan Travel Bureau, JTB. So I think they were just getting a little rest and relaxation before getting into the grind. But anyway, and I'm back in San Diego for a few days and then off to Australia soon. So as always, I never like to stay in one place too long, but thrilled to be back here with you. And hey, we have a very exciting guest that is going to be joining us in a little bit. I'm thrilled to say that we'll be talking with the legendary Holly Hegeman of PlaneBusiness banner fame. She started that newsletter, source of great industry news and insights. She's one of the great personalities of the airline world and one of the sharpest analysts of airline behavior. Past few years or so, she's been under the radar. So I know we're both thrilled that we got her back on the air, if you will. And I'm sure the listeners will really enjoy hearing from Holly. Essentially, I begged her to join us and thrilled that she said yes.
And who can say no to Dave? Totally awesome. I'm really happy to have Holly on the podcast and to bring her wit and wisdom to Airlines Confidential. Okay, Dave, the first news item should be no surprise to anyone. Spirit Airlines Chief Executive Officer Dave Davis told employees to brace for more job cuts and big schedule reductions in November. CNBC said Spirit's schedule will be 25% smaller than last year in November. So far, I looked at the schedule load on Friday with the Cirium database. Spirit now has 3,940 fewer flights scheduled for November this year than it did last year, according to Cirium. And that's 18.5%. So I think probably more cuts to come. And by the way, according to Cirium data, Spirit is about 1/3 smaller than it was 2 years ago.
Wow.
This is going to be very disruptive for travelers as well as for Spirit employees. I'm sure there will be lots of people with tickets for Thanksgiving and even the December holidays who get notice from Spirit that their flights have been canceled. Those people are entitled to cash refunds. Spirit, I'm sure, will try to rebook them or get them to take vouchers toward future flights. But at this point, you'd be kind of foolish not to demand cash back right away. The cash burn at Spirit is a real concern. Spirit has said it's going to need more money from creditors or from a savior to keep going, but nothing has materialized so far, at least as of our recording on Monday. Slashing the schedule and laying off lots of people cuts expenses, but refunds could become an issue too. There's kind of a race underway to get the airline profitable before it runs out of cash. Unless new money is found, this won't be the last shrinking at Spirit. Dave, you were a young guy working at Continental when it filed for its second reorganization in bankruptcy court in 1990. I think you've been through this. Continental emerged with new investment from Air Canada and from David Bonderman's private equity firm. And that turned out to be a huge win for Bonderman. Gordon Bethune flipped the script and made it a well-run powerhouse. Can that happen at Spirit?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned those days, Scott. I remember, that was probably chapter 22, I would say, at Continental. And if you threw my Eastern time in, that was chapter 33, as I occasionally remember that. Hey, and I know the audience out there, now I'm an eternal optimist. I mean, for the employees at Spirit, and ultimately, I think customers out there, it would be good to see them find a way to survive this. And I know, coming certainly from a biased background of just, alumni airline, you usually wouldn't say anything good about a competitor, and, the industry will be just fine with or without Spirit. But you just like to think that they will find a way to reorganize successfully this time around. Obviously, they didn't take all the maybe really hardcore steps they should have the first time. But I will say, I'm also a realist, and, it was a much different landscape. Back in the 90s, I mean, it seems like every carrier at some point ended up through some reorganization, and just a much different looking industry. Today, Spirit's competitors are obviously bigger, and most of them, right? I mean, I guess Frontier can be considered, maybe a like size, but all the big network carriers, they're making money. They have invested in their fleet and facilities and training and all. It just, I think Spirit's going to have such a rough go, and I really do. I wish them the best, because I just don't like to see people impacted in their employment. But, in the end, they probably, all those Spirit employees, if that company doesn't make it, and who knows, they might get absorbed up in other airlines or, other airline-related industry, companies. So I don't know how you shrink your rate of profitability just as single carrier. We know, and we've talked about many times, how the industry has obviously constrain their ASMs to ultimately get into a situation where you had supply and demand that was right. And I'll know we're talking about economics down the road here in a minute, but that's where everybody probably could get some compensatory pricing. But anyway, I'm hoping for the best for Spirit. It's going to be a tough road, right, my friend?
Yes, absolutely. It's not a apples to apples comparison, but Continental had so many benefits. Had Newark, which had turned into a powerhouse. Had Houston. It had a lot of structural advantages. Had a workforce that, because of the bankruptcies, was underpaid compared to competitors, and they were really good airline people who just needed leadership, and that's what Gordon Bethune brought. So,
no, you hit it.
It's just so different.
Yeah, you're right on the money. And there was some diversity on the route system. Obviously, we still had a fair presence in the Pacific, and there were some other areas that Spirit doesn't have that benefit. Yeah, and I mean, to on that end of all this, obviously my old boss at my alumni carrier United, Scott Kirby said, "Hey, Spirit is a dead airline flying." And when he was asked how he knew that, I know everybody's heard that, but his response was, "Hey, I'm good at math." And by the way, I know that he is really good at math, but
yeah.
And then front time, of course, there's going to be a response. I don't think the CEO of Spirit responded directly, but I think, one of their communications folks, gave an answer. But then you had Frontier Airlines CEO Barry Biffle fired back at Scott this past week. And he said, "Hey, the ultra low cost carrier model was, quote, alive and well." And he said the problem discount airlines are having making money is the result of overcapacity in the U.S., not because the ULCC model is broken. Yeah. And he suggested that maybe Kirby took math instead of economics. We do know that Scott, of course, has bachelor and master's degrees in computer science and operations research. So I don't know, maybe Barry Biffle is onto something, but I don't know. There is a lot of math in economics, and all kidding aside, I don't know no matter what way you call it, Spirit has to get its numbers to add up. And so far, they just aren't adding up to anything positive.
Yeah, so true. So true. One thing Scott Kirby added this week that was interesting was that United was not eyeing Spirit assets. Spirit's airplane slots and routes didn't work for United, he said. I think Scott had to say that after saying he thought Spirit was dead. It's really poor form to be trying to push a rival out of business so you can scoop up that rival's assets on the cheap, kind of like saying the milk at the grocery store is all sour and then buying the milk inventory cheap for yourself. That said, I was a bit surprised. I thought United might be interested in a bigger operation in Fort Lauderdale. It may be that Spirit's 14 gates just not enough. But Fort Lauderdale would make United's partnership with JetBlue stronger. It would add to United's network in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it would weaken American's hub in Miami, and all that would be attractive to Scott. But I don't know. Regarding American, United seems more focused on trying to kill American's hub in Chicago these days. And that's probably a whole nother discussion, Dave.
Yes.
In other news, the U.S. government told Delta and Aeroméxico that they had to unwind their 9-year-old joint venture by January 1st. They could still code share, still be SkyTeam partners, and Delta can still retain its 20% ownership stake in Aeroméxico. So if this actually happened, it probably wouldn't be that big a deal. I think this is political and likely to be reversed, like so many Trump administration threats we've seen on the international trade front. This is a dispute with legs, however. The Biden administration proposed ending antitrust immunity for the two in 2024 after long-running complaints of how Mexico was thwarting competition at Mexico City. Because Benito Juarez Airport is so overcrowded, cargo flights were forced to a secondary remote airport, and both U.S. and Mexican airlines had some takeoff and landing slots confiscated. But Mexico is trying to make amends and has told U.S. carriers that slots will be restored. I suspect this is all wrapped up in broader negotiations between Mexico and the U.S. on a host of issues, and the U.S. is just trying to apply negotiating leverage, but we'll see.
Well, you said it, Scott. I think this is probably going to get resolved. I mean, the U.S. Department of Transportation, Secretary Duffy has not called me. Maybe he's called you for my opinion on the situation. But yeah, you know that they're trying to get those slots back. And it's obviously been a pretty hardcore negotiation because I know those folks at Delta are very sharp and their government affairs team. I'm sure they've had some very candid dialogue with the DOT, DOJ, with all those government aficionados in Mexico. I mean, come on. I'm amazed that it kind of got to this point, but it's clear we're the government's holding out for absolutely the best scenario. And so suspect something will break soon, right?
Yeah, I think so. All right. Speaking of the U.S. government, American Airlines was not speaking very kindly of the U.S. government last Friday. 2 Frontier Communications fiber optic cables got cut near the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, killing the area's FAA radars, radio frequencies, and computer systems. The L3 Harris backup system failed too, so only a trickle of takeoff and landings at both DFW and nearby Dallas Love Field for a good bit on Friday. The FAA patched together something temporarily, but it didn't allow much traffic. In all, Americans said more than 100,000 customers were affected by cancellations, delays, diversions, and missed connections. Southwest Airlines fared better, apparently, at nearby Dallas Love Field. Southwest said it had only 1 cancellation. American was fuming. Chief Operating Officer David Seymour posted a letter publicly saying Frontier Communications and L3 Harris were working too slowly to fix it. Seymour said he and CEO Robert Isom had a difficult time reaching leadership of both Frontier and L3 Harris, and, quote, "We are extraordinarily disappointed that neither provider seems to have any sense of urgency to resolve this matter." Frontier said it was working on the problem, which was certainly reminiscent of similar problems at Newark with failed wired communication systems. For its part, the FAA said the outage was clearly an example of the nation's outdated air traffic control infrastructure and the urgent need to modernize it.
Wow. A lot of unhappy campers, clearly.
Yeah.
I did not even know that was happening. I was up in North Carolina for a wedding and missed out on that. So I'm glad I did and was not flying through either DFW or Love Field. But I'm sure as a result, there'll be a lot more attention with those companies that are involved knee deep, and they should be, right? We just can't keep having those things happen.
No, we can, and it's very damaging to airlines. I mean, United's had to go through a whole PR campaign, advertising campaign of, hey, Newark's back, we're hiring people, Newark's got on time rates back up and all that kind of stuff. But I also think this really raises the question of compensation, and one of the things that's difficult about government running this, if you had some kind of accountable organization running air traffic control, there might be compensation. And when that happens, there's more incentive for the provider to invest in more backup systems or accurate backup systems or running tests to make sure the backup systems are working. And, reliability becomes something much more important. But right now it's, oh, darn, the cable got cut. We'll see you tomorrow.
Well, you said it. I know we've been on we've been on our, I can't say, is it the bandwagon? We've been on our, the bully pulpit forever talking about this, and thankful to see, some of this progress and funding and all the things that we can see come down the highway. But that whole issue about what gets measured and rewarded gets managed, and we just haven't quite seen all of that yet. Maybe that'll, end up being much more visible to everybody in time here. But you said it, Scott. I think if we had a little more private accountability for it, we'd be a lot better off.
Yeah.
In time. Hey, a sad note this week, and Scott and I wanted to make sure everybody knew that one of the great ones in the industry passed away, C.D. McLean. He's the former chief operating officer at Continental Airlines. Passed away this last week after a battle with cancer. Truly one of the good guys in the business. CD brought operational excellence to Continental. He was a good-natured, tough guy. He was demanding, but he was just a prince of a guy, and he made things happen, and people were inspired at work for him. Obviously, he made a huge difference in the turnaround at Continental. He retired early at the age of 61, so he was living the good life in North Carolina, in fact. But we're just bummed about that news. Clarence David McLean, he was 83. Deepest sympathies to his family, all those Continental colleagues out there, and his friends, and certainly his very close friend, Gordon Bethune. Mm-hmm. Hey, on a lighter note, Scott, there will be a new baseball team next year, and it will be aviation themed, the Ontario Tower Buzzards. This will be a Los Angeles Dodgers single-A farm team playing at Ontario Field, ONT Field. Yes, ONT Field. The airport has the naming rights deal. And no, they're not actually playing out on the tarmac or on the runway. Not that I can tell here. The Ontario Field is a stadium with capacity for over 6,500 people. It's part of a new sports complex that the city of Ontario built. And since Ontario does have a long history with aviation, and the airport is central to the growth of the community, really the whole Inland Empire, it's a clever bit of marketing. So the team's mascot will be, of all things, of course, Maverick, a goggled bee. Lots of Top Gun references here. Ontario International Airport is raising its profile in the local community and in the airline community as well. It's a very competitive market in the Southern California basin. So all I got to say is congrats to those guys who are coming up with a great marketing campaign. They do need to get Tom Cruise to show up at some point for some of those games out there. And anyway, that's it's pretty cool to see them do that.
Yeah, absolutely. A long line of aviation sports team names, right? I guess starting with the Jets, both New York and Winnipeg. Yes. And certainly airlines have put their names on lots of stadiums, but I don't know an airport doing that. I just think it's a great way of highlighting the importance of the airport and its presence in the area. And sports fans travel. And that's why you see a lot of aviation marketing in NFL broadcasts and in stadiums and NBA and everything else. Sports fans do travel. So
big time. I mean, you and I both know, right? Continental Arena, they had the American Airlines Arena, United Center, all that stuff, right?
Totally. I remember one time Southwest got the marketing rights inside the Boston Garden. They didn't fly to Boston then. um, but they were so excited because they flew to Providence, Rhode Island, and Manchester, New Hampshire. But they just thought this was great marketing in New England to get all the banners inside the arena were Southwest Airlines. They got pushed out eventually, but it was anyway. I can't wait to get my Tower Buzzards baseball cap. It's a great name.
You and me both.
Yeah. And with that hat on, I want to remind everyone that Airlines Confidential wouldn't exist without the support of our sponsors. I want to thank Cirium. Cirium offers the most accurate and precise data and analytics to enable airlines to optimize planning, operations, and passenger services. Also allows us to check Spirit Airlines schedule cuts in real time. The right intelligence drives operational efficiencies, enables you to predict market shifts, and helps airlines respond quickly to maximize revenue, manage costs, and seize commercial opportunity. Visit Cirium.com for more. And this is the perfect time to thank Ontario International Airport for its support and its love of baseball. Faster is always better when it comes to traveling in and out of Southern California. That's why a growing number of travelers are choosing Ontario International Airport. With quick freeway access, easy parking, shorter lines, and close proximity to the ballpark, J.D. Power surveys consistently rank Ontario the most popular mid-sized airport in California. In fact, a recent J.D. Power survey, they did extremely well. Visit flyontario.com to learn more about ONT and how boldly they seize every opportunity, clearly, to connect the inland empire to the world.
And Scott, I think we need to buy one of the first VIP suites at the old Ontario Tower, the old Buzzards group. I think I know we could do well there. We're doing it.
Yeah, Airlines Confidential night at the Buzzards.
We're in. I'm going to check it out. Hey, it's just up the road for me from San Diego. I'll get that taken care of.
I'll see you there.
When you see that bill show up, you'll know the deal. Okay. Hey, we also want to thank good friends and sponsors Pratt & Whitney. At Pratt & Whitney, the pursuit of more sustainable aviation is foundational. For decades, Pratt & Whitney has been at the forefront of revolutionary advancements in aircraft propulsion technology. And by working smarter, cleaner, and greener today, they are committed to supporting the aviation industry in its goal of reaching net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. Learn more about Pratt & Whitney's smarter technology, cleaner fuel, and greener business at prattwhitney.com. And big thanks to Infinity Flight. As a proud partner of the American Airlines Cadet Academy, Infinity Flight delivers high-quality pilot training designed to meet the exacting standards of today's commercial airlines. Infinity Flight is building the next generation of airline pilots, focused, prepared, and ready for the flight deck. Learn more at infinityflight.com. Infinity Flight is the trusted choice of aspiring aviation professionals and the world's largest airlines. Okay, so let's bring in the queen of airline knowledge, the fabulous, effervescent, amazing Holly Hegeman.
Holly Hegeman describes herself as a journalist, airline analyst, entrepreneur, speaker, big picture visionary, serial cage rattler, and financial sleuth. She is all of that and much more. Holly is founder, publisher, and CEO of PlaneBusiness Banter, a must-read newsletter for more than 24 years. Holly worked at TheStreet.com and The Motley Fool and worked as a strategic communications consultant at American Airlines for someone named Robert Crandall. She basically pioneered the airline newsletter business, bringing loyal readers a mix of analysis, reporting, insight, and gossip that set a tone within airlines. Many have told me that PlaneBusiness Banter was a key source of information that helped people in the airline business feel connected and in the know, no matter where in the world they were. She shut it down in 2023 because doing anything weekly at a very high level wears you out. Holly's journalism started in the 6th grade, where she created a newspaper and sold it to other students for 5 cents a copy. Before her airline life, she was an owner in 3 different bars and restaurants in New Orleans, her hometown. Holly, you may be the most requested guest ever for Airlines Confidential. It's great to catch up with you, especially at such an interesting time in the airline industry.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Dave. I'm looking forward to it.
Thrilled to have you here, Holly.
We always start, Holly, with what we affectionately call the Ben Baldanza question, because Ben taught me this was a great way to start interviews, and always been interesting stories. So the question is, how'd you get into this crazy business?
I'm going to assume you're talking about the airline business.
Yes.
It is actually a pretty cool story. I guess you could say my family was somewhat always transport oriented. My great-grandfather was heavily involved in the railroad industry, and that kind of came through generations. My father was a railroad nut, used to fly around the world to ride trains. And then my brother, when he got back from Vietnam, decided to take his VA money and learn how to fly. And so there's always been this kind of theme in our family. It's somewhat transport oriented, but I hadn't really done anything specifically airline oriented at all. That all changed when I was in New York and I was SVP for an investment firm. But one of our clients, big clients, was the British American Chamber of Commerce. And it just so happened that Bob Crandall was speaking at their big meeting at the Hilton that spring. And this was the spring after the flight attendant strike, that took place in November.
Yeah.
And so as a communications person who is always looking at these big picture views of things, I had been fascinated, to put it mildly, astounded might be a better word, at how American Airlines let the flight attendants get the upper hand in that situation. As you, recall, Bob had this reputation as being an excellent communicator. And the airline pretty much at that time was top of the heap across the board. And yet they had totally blown the situation with the flight attendants, in my estimation, from a messaging standpoint. And so I was curious. This had nothing to do with what I was doing during the daylight hours. It was just a personal curiosity. I wanted to see the man in person. And so I went and watched him work the crowd before the speech, which was one persona of Mr. Crandall's. And then I watched him give his speech, and then I watched him handle questions after the speech. Then I went back to my little office and decided that either A, somebody was not giving him good advice because they were afraid of him, or B, he was getting good advice and he wasn't listening to it. Because the difference in his personalities and the way he interacted with people was just, it was very noticeable. I.e., he was Mr. Personality in the warm-up. He was Mr. Straight-laced and boring during the speech. The speech was terrible. And then afterwards, when people were asking questions, he got very short-tempered with them. And he would actually lean over the edge of the stage and take his hand, to speed things up. I've heard this question before, I don't want to listen to it again. Which didn't really come across too well. And so I went back, and for whatever reason, I wasn't looking for a job. I just felt like something was not right here, and it bugged me. So I sent him a 4-page letter, and I critiqued his performance. And I basically said, if you don't change the way that you communicate with your employees, the pilots are going to do the same thing to you that the flight attendants did. I know.
Yeah.
And history was made.
And about 2 weeks later, I'm in my office and the phone rings. I pick it up and this voice goes, is this Holly Hegeman? Yes. Well, this is Phyllis Nunnery. I am Robert Crandall's executive assistant, and he is in receipt of a letter. And about at that point, I was either drop the phone on the floor or say to myself, what in the hell have you done? And that was the start, because make a long story short, they flew me out to Dallas, and I had lunch with Bob and Tom Kiernan, who was then head of HR at American. And to give you an idea of how lunch went, after we walked out, Tom took me in his office, closed the door, and said, I've never heard anybody speak to Bob Crandall like that. And I said, well, maybe they should. And so I was, like I said, fully employed plus some. And, but he, at some point during lunch, got a little perturbed and said, well, I suppose you don't think I'm communicating well with my employees across the board, do you? I said, well, I just don't know. I haven't seen you do that. Well, we can make that happen. How are you going to be able to work with me? And so that's where it started. And I started doing consulting work with him in my my waking hours left over from trying to sleep. But it was great, flew around and watched him do his presidential conferences, sat in on specific meetings, started working with the woman who was then doing all of his speech writing, and then eventually ended up doing the annual report for AMR the next year. But yeah, that's how I got into the airline industry per se. And it really was cool because it brought together so many things. It brought together the financial side, which I had become more and more interested in pursuing with airlines, with personalities, with communication issues, because the status of the run-of-the-mill PR and comms department at your normal airline in the mid-90s was there was a lot lacking. Let's just say that. Yeah. That's not the case today. But boy, back in the day, it wasn't great.
I just got to say, we do owe Bob Crandall thanks for a lot of innovation and, so many things that he did, not only for American, but for the industry. Did not fully recognize he was responsible for your official entrance into the airline business. So, Bob, if you're listening, and I'm sure he's an Airlines Confidential listener, he probably knows this story, but it's great now that everybody else knows because obviously the industry's benefited greatly since you got into it and may have made such a huge impact on it, Holly.
That is a great story. One of the most unique stories I think I've heard.
I think it was unique, but it also was, as you work through with different management teams with different companies, it's interesting and it always has been the most interesting thing to me is the management group and the personalities in that group. Mm-hmm. And so the thing is that once you understood Bob and how he thought about the world, that's all you needed to know. That's why I knew pretty much, Gerard was in line because I was handed off to Gerard to do some work with him. I could see that the relationship between Don Carty and Bob had taken a hit. There were the American was really already in a phase of there's going to be a corporate reshuffling, and so it was interesting to be, right there in the middle of all that. And then Bob, this is my unusual thing that I would say about Bob. He was the best editor I ever had, really? And he admitted to me that he almost took a job as the executive editor of the paper I don't think it was in Providence. I can't remember what it was now, but or it might have been in Hartford. But he had an offer to be the executive editor of this major newspaper, and he almost did it. And we were perfect because I tend to overwrite, and he would write very plainly. So between the two of us, I would write, then he would go in and cut things to pieces, and then we'd fight back and forth on the fax machine. And but in the long run, it really I felt was a great partnership, and one of the smartest people I've ever met, no question.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Hey, and there's so much to talk about, Holly. It's just hardly not sure what to ask you first. Your adoring fans around the planet, certainly those that have been listeners of Airlines Confidential, but then all the PlaneBusiness banner folks that found out you're on the show today. I know they're going to be excited to hear a lot of things that Scott and I want to ask you. But one thing is the notion that there's been structural change post-pandemic. Well, that certainly seems to be true. Costs have converged, revenues moved to the big guys. So are you buying the Scott Kirby thesis, my old fabulous former boss, that it's a different industry now and the ULCCs are toast?
Oh, how long have we heard Scott talk about this? This is nothing. This is nothing new. If if Scott needs a little banner above his head for anything else, he could certainly have one above his head that said Spirit Airlines killer. I mean, when those fuel prices dropped in 2015, 2016, Scott did the unthinkable. And, Lord, I still remember flying from Dallas to Washington National for $38. Do you remember those days, Scott?
I remember the days when it was 2000 too.
Well, yeah, but this was when, Scott just went scorched earth when Ben began to expand into the bigger markets, and he began to expand in Dallas.
Yeah.
And I remember those earnings calls, and I remember the analyst community and throwing their hands up and going, "Oh my God, he can't do this." And he did it. And I think that my opinion is I just don't think Spirit ever was able to get their footing after that. I think Spirit, and you could see in the numbers even when they began to expand, as soon as they started nibbling around the bigger markets, they just weren't going to be able to get away with what they've been able to get away with the smaller markets. And we've seen this, it's not anything new in this industry. So, yeah, this isn't, I laugh because everybody, to me, it's like people think, oh my God, Scott's come out and he's just, but Scott was the man who started this. And Scott has said this from, it's been almost 10 years.
Been pretty consistent. Obviously, he's been a little more
Yes.
rebel rousing on the Spirit issues most recently.
Well, it's the old kicking somebody when they're down, I guess. But in that, this industry is not known for being overly nice to its participants from time to time. So, that's Scott, and you got to believe he's kind of happy about it. So there you go. The problem that the low fare carriers have, obviously, is that the bigger carriers have morphed into different animals, and you've got that. Then you've got the problems inherent with the. I go online and crawl through a lot of the user arenas, let's say, and I think there is a purpose in the low fare carrier. It's not like there's no need for them to be out there. There are a lot of reasons why they need to be out there, and they can be successful. But I think the easy pickings days, and we all lived through that. Where the low fare carriers come in and undercut the big guys and go to town. I just don't think, I think we've morphed into a different phase. So it's going to be interesting who can survive and how they can do it.
Right. And they used to come to town with the brass band playing, and they would create their own demand.
Right.
Right. Ben,
let's face it. I mean, Ben, it's funny because Ben and I had talked, it's probably 8 or 9 years ago now. He had invited me to be on the podcast. And, I didn't feel, there were some people who thought that I was a little hard on Ben during the Spirit high times. The only thing that I did not care for was the advertising campaign. I didn't have anything personal against Ben. I didn't have anything, but they were doing a pretty damn good job at what they were doing at the time. But what I did object to was the campaign, I think. And, I think about that Spirit advertising campaign all the time now, because it's kind of like we've morphed into that, only now we get it 24/7.
Yeah.
Let's see how outrageous we can be and how many eyeballs we can get.
Yeah, no, you look back, it was probably pretty tame. So you mentioned the big guys morphing, and I'm curious, how much of all this do you think is the result of consolidation? Or do you think there's even sort of, you mentioned Scott's aggressive behavior. Would you call it predatory? Would you say the big guys are pouring capacity into LCC leisure markets to do damage there, or are they just going into leisure markets because that's where people want to go these days, and business travel's not come back as it was?
Yeah, I don't think it's predatory at all. I mean, predatory, let's talk about American and Vanguard, or talk about things in the past, fist fights we've seen all over the place. The point you brought up is valid. There are more people, I think, who our flying leisure or the bleisure or whatever, that in between.
Sure.
You've also got, our corporations. I mean, I have to say, I think the area of the whole travel experience that is most problematic to me right now, more than the lower fare carriers versus the big carriers, is just the whole question of distribution. And, this is Dave's corner of the world, but talk about a screwed up, not functioning. And this has been going on for years and years and years. And, again, when you get into IT and distribution questions, then you're also getting into some things that separate the men from the boys now, too. I cannot say enough positive things about, you look at what United has done in the last 5, 6, 7 years. They were out of the box with the best handheld app. I mean, I don't care what anybody says, and I've had people admit to me from other airlines who shall be nameless that, yes, they do have the best app, and because they looked at things differently. And but the distribution system and how tickets are sold and how I want to tear my hair out and scream. It is the most frustrating, dysfunctional system of any corporate. I'm thinking of some other business that has to go through these contortions, and I can't think of anything. But again, that affects the lower fare guys too, because they can't afford to compete. The Avellos of the world or Breeze or whomever. That, I guess you could say, that difference, I think, is only going to get more of it's going to be more important going forward because the big guys have the money and they can afford to make these changes and maybe leapfrog. I mean, we see it with Southwest, right?
Yes.
How many years? I mean, we could talk years, weeks at least, about Southwest. And I think that's what's put them at a disadvantage, is because they sat for so long and did not say, we have to do X, Y, Z. They just said, no, it's working. We're making money.
Right.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that, Holly. Obviously, in the distribution side, it has been fascinating to watch. We've seen these, and you and I go back decades, probably. I think that's it. I know it's shocking since we're so young, but and Scott has been there as well, watching this between the changes in distribution, whether it's through the travel management companies, those technologies, whether it's on the GDS side or what's happened with NDC or not happened, the payment side of the house. And we're seeing a pretty extraordinary, I think, an onslaught in the market of a lot of options. Nothing's been, I think, probably totally flushed out yet, but there are a lot of changes in the marketplace. So it's interesting you brought that up. There are a lot of folks they're at least trying and very innovative. But it's interesting you talk about, obviously Southwest finally jumped fully into the GDS. I think Frontier had jumped in. I think there's a number of other carriers. And so it's funny you mention that, because distribution, while it always got talked about, it was, always focused on maybe some of the bigger issues, whether it's labor or fleet or, facilities, other things like that. And now it's really top of mind.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most frustrating things for me, and one of the reasons I just decided, do you really want to comment on the same story year after year after year, was on the business travel side. I just think there hasn't been really a lot of oversight or people, in that space talking about it from a financial perspective. And then we actually saw, I mean, we could talk about the whole situation at American and, what happened there and what they thought they could do and what they couldn't do. And I think it's just, I've always found in talking to management at the airlines, it's an area that they don't really know much about. And in some cases, I would almost feel they don't care about it. And yet, you're talking about something that controls, a hell of a lot of their revenue, and they should have a better understanding of it or why they need to pay it. Well, Dave, just the way that corporate entities really don't take the position of travel manager that seriously sometimes. That is a very serious position these days.
Hugely important. I always, certainly my perspective, and when I was fortunate to lead the sales force, I always try to make sure our team understood how critical that group of corporate travel managers could be to our results, and ultimately talking to their procurement folks. And, it's kind of morphed through time between HR and procurement and finance. But, it's critical to ultimately an airline's profitability in the end. Obviously, you would think
Right.
that business travel and the higher yielding. Well, to that end, and I know Scott had one of these questions. You talked about American. It doesn't have to be back to all that happened last year, although it would be fascinating since we haven't gotten to hear from you, your thoughts about American and what's going on with them, and maybe what did happen and where they are today.
Do we have a couple hours?
Yeah.
I mean, to start with America, where do you start? I mean, the ironic thing, and you understand this, Dave, is that, when American did merge with US Airways and Scott came in, and what his initial look was, which was, we're going to do away with this and do away with that and do away with this. And then he had his opinion changed.
Yes.
And then after he moved to United, it changed even more. And so then you were left with this core at American, like, okay, he's gone. So now where do we go from here? And I think that, to me, looking at what they tried to do, I think they just totally disallowed the importance of that one-to-one communication. And which goes to, the mindset we're talking about, where upper management, I don't really think understands how important all this is. And they thought they could just go out and destroy relationships that had been in existence for many years between companies and the airline, and just say, that's okay, it doesn't matter, and this is the better way to go, and this is why we feel that way. And to see, and with no real clear explanation. I mean, they had an explanation, but let's face it, for the people who were in the agencies, all of this was just very, very difficult. And they really couldn't, I didn't feel, they really didn't ever, how can you put it? It was all of this was for their benefit. Now, they tried to make it so that, oh no, if you do this, it's going to help your relationship. But it was just so poorly planned from the beginning. I'm not saying that bits and pieces of it are not, valid and weren't valid then, but to just summarily destroy a corporate team that's been in existence for years and years with those relationships, and to make it so easy for the competition to go in the door and say, look, you just lost all your CKs, fine. We'll give you global services. We'll give you 10 global services. Well, because that's what you guys, United, Delta, it was like, oh my God, they couldn't have asked for anything better.
Yeah.
They just put themselves in such a terrible position because I know 2 years ago when I spoke at this private corporate management meeting, there were people in there who were corporate travel managers of big accounts. And they were so upset because they were getting it from their CEOs and their CFOs. They didn't want to lose their status, and they didn't want to do this and do that. And then they were trying to explain to them, well, this is what's happening. And then it was like, no, well, then go see if you can put us on somebody else. And I just felt like from the get-go, when American rolled all this out, it wasn't very well thought out. And if I heard one thing over and over and over again from buyers, it was they just thought they could shove this down our throat. It was almost the exact quote all the time. And I was doomed from the start.
Well, They seem to make it, right, Scott? I mean, they seem to make it through. Obviously, now on the other side, what do you think about what they're doing today? Just the airline.
Well, if you ask me, and I want to hear what Holly said. I think a lot of permitted damage was done. The recovery is expensive and long, but I think there are corporate accounts that they won't win back. And people, as Holly said, people did go to United and Delta, and they may be perfectly happy there. And why should I go back to those scoundrels that
Right.
did that to us? I think it shows up in the numbers. I have said before many times in the podcast, I'm really concerned about American losing market share in big cities, which are competitive, right? They're going to do fine in Dallas. They're going to do fine in Charlotte. But look at how Scott Kirby's trying to run them out of Chicago. And look at where they are in Los Angeles, where Delta is now number one. And look at where they are in New York, where they got so weak they had to go into partnership with JetBlue,
Right.
which got killed. And I think it's all related. And so, my question, Ollie, is what's ahead in the future? Do they recover? Are they sort of locked in as the number 3 airline in the U.S.? What do you think?
Well, I think watching some of the decisions that management had made prior to the last few years, they were resigned to that position. I don't know about you, but I never heard in any of their media day presentations or anything else. And it was one of the gripes. I know you heard, I had the same gripe, which was, what do you want American Airlines to be?
Yeah.
I mean, some of their own CorpCom people I had this discussion with, and they were just as frustrated. It was like, the airline never seemed to come out and say, okay, because with Delta, we know what Delta wants to be. No question. United, we know now what United wants to be. No question. Southwest in their heyday. Nope. But the airline was never able to voice strongly and, with confidence, this is the type of airline we want to be. And when you don't do that, then employees aren't sure, investors aren't sure, and then they made the mistake of doing all the stock buybacks, and they ran up the debt, and it was always, but it's low cost debt. It doesn't matter. It's still debt. And it's just amazing to me that the stock price has never gotten above where it was in the spring of 2017. There came a point, it was an inflection point, and I used it in PBB a couple times over the years. From that point on, the stock price of United has gone up and the stock price of American has gone down.
Right.
And it has never, ever been that high since.
Yeah.
And because nobody has any real confidence, I don't think, that, they just seem to be kind of happy to be, I don't know, middle of the road, mediocre. I know that's not what the employees feel, or even management probably, but I'm sorry, but I mean, that's the feeling you get, So I don't. Long term, they've got a problem with their debt. There's no question. If it doesn't matter how low interest rates go, or if they go high, or whatever, I think they also made a big mistake during COVID when they put so many of their wide bodies into retirement. It made them, they couldn't come back and grab that international market business then when things return to normal. They're caught up in the whole Boeing situation. Can't get airplanes. So they're kind of relegated to that, southwest swath, Charlotte, Dallas, Phoenix, across. And I agree with you. Even when I was still in Dallas, their service to New York, they had pared back so much that you had what? We had 2 options to get out of New York, to get back in the afternoon if you wanted to try to get back. In Chicago, you and I both know, Scott, they've never, neither United or American has ever really had a lead in market share where it was always kind of that wash situation. But now, United's been able to make some headway, and
right.
It's a lot of stuff, and it starts with, I think, that vision, that, what do you want to be? Do you want to be third place forever? Well, then you're going to pay a price. And I also agree with you on the people who have switched, who took the options and switched to United and Delta, and they're not coming back. I know any number of people in that boat. Yeah. Sure.
And you mentioned wide bodies, and I think the transcon market suffer. They've lost a lot of market share because they went to the tricked out narrow body, and ultimately, I don't know, they've lost a lot of ground there. But I think this also raises a really interesting issue of leadership. And when you talk about motivating employees and rallying around a goal, a cause, a plan, whatever. And you've known them all. I'm sure you have favorites and least favorites. I know you know very close and a big fan of Herb Kelleher as well as Bob Crandall. So I'm curious what you think about the personalities, the leadership of the industry now, and any great stories you want to share about leaders in the past.
Let's see. I have to be careful here. No,
but Herb wouldn't mind. Herb's not going to mind.
No, Herb's not going to mind. Well, I gave, for a number of years, I gave two different types of awards for CEOs at PlaneBusiness. I had the Ron Allen Airline Mismanagement Award, which of course was named after the infamous CEO at Delta. And we'll just leave it at that. And then, but on the other hand, then I would have the Wild Turkey Airline Management Award. And that, of course, went to people who had done good things. And, one of the people that comes to mind is not somebody that people think of often, and that was Bill Ayer at Alaska.
Yeah.
And he actually didn't, as much as I covered Alaska at the time, I had never had a chance to meet him personally. I knew of him through several of his top-level employees, but had never met him. And then it was actually Herb who sent me a little email and suggested, because I had said publicly that we were in that phase where, this was the next Wild Turkey Airline Management Award would be awarded. And so he sent me an email and he said, I know it's not my award. It is named adjacent to me, but have you thought about Bill Ayer? And he gave me some information in the email, and then I started nosing around. And I was very impressed by what he had done at the airline and that culture that he had developed and nurtured, and was very impressed to meet him. So, yeah, it was very quiet. You didn't hear a whole lot about him, but the employees just loved that man.
That's a great thought. He's a terrific guy. And I'll just say he brought me in to talk to his board one time about what customers wanted and customer service and all from my perspective. And I thought that nobody's ever done that. I thought that was fascinating. Bring a journalist into your board meeting to somebody who writes about what road warriors want and need. And I got great questions from the board members, and it was a terrific session. And I thought, how innovative of this guy to be willing to do that. Because some of it was criticism of Alaska's service as well. It was fascinating. So sorry to interrupt, but I think that's a great thought about Bill Ayer.
By the way, obviously, he set a great tone from a culture perspective. I know there's been a number of CEOs since, but Alaska still carries a lot of that on today. Yeah. And obviously, trying to make it work with their merger with Hawaiian. And it's so they had a great point, Holly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so he was one. He is definitely one that I really enjoyed meeting. But there's Richard Anderson. Richard has got to be, up at the top. I was very lucky to be able to sit down and we would talk just totally off the record. I never formally interviewed Richard for a Lounge Lizard interview or any other interview. But he was kind enough to let me meet with him for a long time in his office, even when the CorpCom people came running in to tell him somebody was there. And I watched as Richard kind of side-eyed that particular PR person and said, so... like, don't hurry me. Okay, fine. Just go away. Richard was, again, talk about intelligent people in the industry. Very, very intelligent. First time I met him was at the Phoenix Aviation Symposium. Mm-hmm. Goodness gracious, we could go on about those, couldn't we? Yeah. And he had just taken over at Northwest, and I always remember he was on stage, and they had been told they could not do PR presentations for the airlines, right? And so he had gotten up and done his little, very short and very succinct presentation. And I forget who else was on the panel, but the last person to speak was Dave Barger. And he had just taken over at JetBlue, and he wouldn't shut up.
Well, Dave had a lot of good things to say. I'm sure Mr. Nealman didn't want to speak at that gig. So
he did. And it just went on. And it was so funny to sit there and watch Richard, just like, if you could throw darts from your eyes, he would have. And that pretty much summed Richard up. The more, the times I did get to sit and talk to him, you didn't waste that man's time. But boy, stories. We talked about, what's the group? The Conquistadors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one day, I don't know how we got on. I guess we were talking about Herb, because Herb was not doing well at that point in time, and that's how we got started. And he told me that the one time that he attended the Conquistadors was at the invitation of Herb, and Richard looked at me and he said, "I just don't get it." And if you know Rich, you know the look I'm talking about. He just would lower his head and kind of look up at you and go, "I don't get it." He said, "You hear grown men riding horses, sleeping in bunk beds, playing poker, drinking copious amounts of alcohol.
Wild turkey in particular." Thing.
He said, I just don't, yeah. Anyway. There were other details I'll not get into. But anyway, but it was just hilarious. And that was when he was sitting there with his orange Halloween socks on and his orange, suspenders, because it was Halloween.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I liked Richard because there was that little bit of eccentric to his personality. But boy, again, you talk about people who loved working for him, even though he could be very difficult to work for. They respected him. And I think he handled the merger, the after effects, pretty damn well.
Sure did. I mean, pretty amazing. I know you could go on. In fact, Scott and I, we have to get you back because I know that's just scratching the surface of some of the stories of the personalities that you know. And Scott and I were interested. I mean, this is hard one, Holly, because from a time perspective, I know you should go on because we would love it. If you looked over the past 3 or 4 decades in the industry, is there a biggest disappointment or surprise, or is there biggest accomplishment or achievement that you've witnessed that you would regale us with?
I have to say, I mean, I continue to be impressed with what Scott and the folks at United have done at United. And I'm going to say that even though before I stopped publishing, I would get routine notes saying, "Oh, you just like United. Why don't you go work for United?" Oh, well, because when you have somebody or a company in this industry who can, especially a major airline, that can drag itself up out of the morass of where it's been. And let's face it, you talk about United and its management. If we go back to the 90s and come up, it was not good. It just wasn't good. And to see an organization of that size be able to be turned around financially, culturally, in terms of their IT situation, it gives me hope that other people can do the same thing. So that really has been the best surprise, I think, in the last 10 years, is to see what happened. You had a CEO who was running around, has a heart attack, nobody knows what's going on. The boards, one of the craziest boards in existence. I like it because it's so, big, and I know it drives them all crazy, but that was good. What isn't good is to see people in this industry just do the same thing over and over again and make the same mistakes, I guess. There's not enough, I don't see enough ingenuity these days. Do you, Scott?
Um, I think what Delta has done in reliability is pretty ingenious and very effective, and Richard Anderson started that. But a lot of smart people did a lot of smart things and turned a lot of assumptions on their side. Well, we're never going to be on time. We're always going to have cancellations. No,
Right.
we can eliminate cancellations. So I think that, to me, that's one of the biggest innovations of the last 10, 15 years.
My side of it, Holly. Obviously, I'm biased, and what United's accomplished and needed to, because Delta set the bar high.
Right.
American has had a long history, very successful. Obviously, it's gone through its ups and downs. Southwest has always been pretty amazing what they do, even through their challenges that we've talked about, and on and on. But I do think the investments made over the last, especially coming off the pandemic, which is hopefully once in a century kind of scenario, to see the investments actually improving these products, and whether it's technology or actually the hard products on the airplane, and whether it's domestic, international, I'm proud that the industry has made these investments and continues to find ways to actually also make money too, which again, going back, we'll see if Spirit finds a way out and all that kind of stuff. But it has been fun to see actually investors maybe get a little return as well. So I think you and I'd have to agree, pretty proud to see the evolution of the industry over the last, especially 20 years.
And let me just add, I think there's a good chance if we get back on this 2 years from now, or even a year from now, we may look back and say, wow, the transformation of Southwest Airlines is remarkable. Now the jury's still out. We'll see if they can pull it off. But I think with a lot of changes that they're making now, a lot of changes to come, we're going to say, holy smokes, they remade the airline, or holy smokes, they lost the airline. But it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Yes. No, I agree with you. I think that, but again, I just wish they'd done it or started doing it 10 years ago.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All right. So I know people want to know. Tell us what you're up to these days.
What am I doing? I haven't done a lot with the industry now for 4 years. I left the end of 21 and did have some health issues. I mean, before I left, I talked about those. It wasn't clear whether it was long COVID or what I was going through, but now at least I have a diagnosis, which is I have some issues with some vertebrae in my lower back. All of those who write for a living, I'm sure you have the same issue to a certain extent, Mr. McCartney. And so I've been dealing with that and getting settled in a new place. I still haven't gone through all my boxes from the move, and it's only been, 3 years. Just trying to figure out what the next thing is I want to do. Every day I'm reminded by people sending me notes that I have a voice and maybe I should be doing something. But to be honest, I don't know whether that's airline related or in some other topic. I am in training to become a docent at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. And that's been a really cool experience. And I don't know, just I guess decompressing. I think you mentioned, either we talked or in something you wrote to me, you talked about the grind of doing what I did for so long. And it was rough. And I probably pushed myself too far a lot of times. And so it's been nice to just take some time off and, talk to the cats and do what I want to do and not have to fly all the time. But just, I don't know, first time in my life I'd taken time to just sit back and take it easy for a while.
And you know what, Holly, you deserved it. We did talk about that, about decompressing and
Yes.
just maybe stopping to, the famous proverbial smell the roses a little bit.
Yes.
And so again, you deserved it. But, you got a lot of fans around the world. Scott and I certainly included in a big way. And
absolutely,
we'd love to see you re-engage at some point, whatever it is you want to do. I don't even recognize what that was at the art. I don't think I've heard that term, but I'm a little less than cultured than you, Ms. Hegeman. So maybe you'll have to give me some education and updating on all that. But we are thrilled that you agreed to spend some time with us. It's meant a lot, and it's I know again they love you, Holly, and they want to hear you again, and so hopefully at some point it'll make sense where you re-engage on a more regular basis. That would be a real blessing for us all.
Of course, because the biggest thing I miss is just the interaction with subscribers and people who I dealt with on a regular basis. It's a huge community out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Holly. And
Okay.
maybe part of that re-engagement is coming back to Airlines Confidential.
That would be great.
So we really appreciate it. We'll be right back with the mailbag on Airlines Confidential.
Promotional consideration provided by the Archive.net, celebrating 20 years with a fresh new look and over 60,000 items of AvGeek goodness. It's the hub of air transport history, and you're welcome aboard. The Archive.net.
Okay, Scott, listener Aaron in Nashville sent a question about the recent Wall Street Journal investigations into the airline cabin fume incidents. So Aaron says, "Hi, Scott, really enjoy your show. I'm curious to get your thoughts on an article that recently appeared in the Wall Street Journal. Toxic fumes are leaking into airplanes, sickening crews and passengers. So what's your experience and perspective with this? And thank you for your dedication to the show and to the listeners." So Scott, Aaron wants to know, what do you think of the story?
Yeah, very interesting. First, let me say I'm really proud of the Wall Street Journal for continuing to spend time and money on big investigative reporting projects. It's not easy to do in this environment where you often get measured by very quick hits and quick and dirty stories, and newspapers are often reluctant to invest the time and money in major investigative projects. In this case, the Journal went through 1 million computer records, service difficulty reports filed by airline people, and using machine learning algorithms and large language models, they really pulled new findings out of the SDR database that we just hadn't seen before. The Journal found many instances of toxic fumes affecting passengers, flight attendants, and pilots. This isn't a new problem. We know what the problem is. Fresh air is heated in aircraft engines, so it is breathable and comfortable in the cabin. These bleed air systems have seals that sometimes fail, and the air can get contaminated with toxic chemicals from the engine. And these toxic fumes can cause serious neurological issues and health concerns. A doctor who has worked several of these cases likened it to a chemical-caused concussion in the Journal story. So the Journal wasn't uncovering a new problem. What the Journal found was the problem is increasing in frequency and happening more often than the industry has reported. It seems to be increasing on the A320 and more specifically the A320neo. And this was really fascinating. The FAA says it has counted less than 33 fume events per million aircraft departures, very low rate. But the Journal said it found more than double that number of fume events in 2024. From the story, quote, "The rate has soared in recent years. In 2014, the Journal found about 12 fume events per million departures. By 2024, the rate had jumped to nearly 108. The FAA said part of the reason for the increase may be better reporting, but the Journal also found that Airbus has changed its maintenance requirements. The story said that the rate of fume events started increasing in 2016. That's the same year Airbus started delivering A320neos. Airlines complained to Airbus, apparently, that fume events were keeping new planes grounded for days at a time. So Airbus loosened requirements for inspection and deep cleaning after fume events. Following that, the incidence of multiple fume events has jumped. One Spirit Airlines A320 had 6 reported fume events in 1 month. There's much more to the story, and I really commend it to listeners. Go read it, because this is important. The industry needs to do more on this problem to protect the health of crews and of passengers. I think it needs more attention, and that's what the journal story brought to it. But kudos for advancing our knowledge of what's happening with fume events.
Absolutely. And, I'm certainly not an expert on the technical side, but the only fumes I remember were, smoking in the 80s in the airplanes. That obviously got resolved. But this is, it really is an important story. And I'm sure as a result, there will be improvements, enhancements, and there should be, right? You shouldn't be worried about that kind of scenario where you'd actually suffer some real, like I said, neurological concussion, right? You don't want that.
There was a pilot who collapsed in the jetway. I mean, this is not good stuff, and it needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for bringing that up. And I know you're proud of your old fabulous employers at the Wall Street Journal, and I always enjoy reading those guys, and I'm sure there will be good results as a follow-up. That's all for another edition of Airlines Confidential. Thanks so much to Holly Hegeman for joining us, and Scott, thank you again for the invite to be your co-host for this. It's always a real privilege and pleasure. And again, thanks so much to the listeners all around the planet of Airlines Confidential. It means a lot to be a part of this.
Thanks to you, Dave. Always a pleasure, always insightful, always fun. Thanks again to Holly. I'll be back next week with co-host Charles Duncan and a true legend of the industry, Pedro Heilbronn, who has led Copa Airlines for 37 years to growing profits, stability, and operational excellence. Listeners will love hearing more about Copa and learning from Pedro the keys to success in the airline industry. Have a great week, everyone, and thanks for listening.
This podcast is produced by Mass Media. Info@massmedia.net.